You are a human animal. You are a very special breed. For you are the only animal who can think, who can reason, who can
Hi,
read.
this is Michael Silverblatt, and welcome to Bookworm. I'm talking today to Alexander Theroux, and it's a fairly unusual show. As you know, most of the time we have a show because a writer has a new book and it's available, and, you know, the show is a celebration of that fact. This show is a anti-celebration. Alexander Theroux has 3 books. None of them are available, and he's a writer I've always admired. There was a recent issue of the Review of Contemporary Fiction celebrating his work. Our local arts foundation, the Lannan Foundation, gave Theroux a writing grant this year. But the nightmare is that all 3 of his major books, his first 3 WOGs, his second and widely regarded as his major work, Darkenville's Cat, and his third, An Adultery, have all vanished. Now, listeners, I believe that liking this show, you have become bookworms like me. And so, you know, of course, if you scour the used bookstores in Los Angeles, which are very good, if you go to your libraries, you can find the works of Alexander Theroux, and I recommend it. But this show is being created in protest of this unfortunate situation. Alexander Theroux, welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
I wanted to talk to you about the state of American publishing that's led to books that are widely regarded as, you know, masterpieces by some, and even by opponents, certainly they're regarded as, you know, major minor curiosities. How is it that a book disappears?
A hideous ontological fact might be that the quality of the book is inversely proportionate to the a success, to a person's appetite for quality. I invented one of those, by the way, that the size of the truck is inversely proportionate to the head of the man driving it. That's an original little observation I made along those lines. But by pursuing excellence, or trying to round off metaphors and make them right, maybe just during the course of a day, and getting that, squiring that page forward in quality writing, that you almost alienate readers. That if a book is accessible, it's almost therefore judged as worthy. So accessibility seems to be the point of departure for what people look for.
I used to think, at least, that a work of, you know, great originality and beauty would find its audience. What it had to do was to persuade its publishers.
But what made you think, in society, where do you find that the case? I mean, streets look the same. Just look at the pastel colors of cars. I mean, they're hideous colors of cars. Why do so many people want so much that's ugly?
Well, it seems to me that whether or not, for instance, they read Nabokov, there was a great worship of him. On another level, whether or not they really think of Burroughs as being a stylist as opposed to an apocalyptic ex-drug addict, nevertheless, he's been consistently in print. There are American writers who have kept and maintained, if not a strong audience, at least an enthusiastic publisher.
I don't know if there are a lot of examples of that. There are more examples of the other. I think there's what was it T.S. Eliot talked about, the dissociation of sensibility. How we seem to there seems to be. I mean, if you use many allusions or extravagant sentences, let's say many complex, just the idea of the complex sentence. That's a very alienating factor. I mean, even among educated critics, you know, the minimalist idea, is it Richard Ford, get away from similes, get away from metaphors, get away from allusions that are ecclesiastical.
Well, it seems to me, though...
Nabokov once said, you know, his ideal reader were a bunch of little Nabokovs.
And he, what was marvelous during those Nabokov years was that he seemed to be capable of spawning them. There were,
but he did with the Lolita because most people thought that was a book. Was it Lionel Trilling pointed out it's a book about the heart? It was a book about love, not sex. But most people bought that because they thought it was about sex.
Well, in a certain way,
I suppose it is to a degree, but
I'm not sorry. It's in a certain way, whatever makes a great book acceptable. I don't mind the sham.
No, I totally agree with you. But my point is, that was that was bought as a Judith Krantz novel, not as Lolita.
No, that's true. Or if not as a Judith Krantz novel, an Olympia secret, unexpunged bit of erotica.
No, I'm not sure about that because most people that bought that saw just a 12-year-old girl licking a lollipop and looking over the top of her glasses. They didn't know anything about the Olympia Press origins of Lolita. They saw that as a salacious book. I remember in I think it was 58 or 59, where I was a lifeguard in a Boston MDC pool, Metropolitan District Commission pool, a cop lumbering over to me and badgering me for the book that he took to the men's room when he came back after about 50 minutes and flung it at me because there were no four-letter words, oddly enough, in that book, and said the book is, he used it, and he said I hated it. He was flashing through it.
Yes, and he couldn't find the wet pages.
How many people didn't read Ben Sinister? How many people didn't read The Gift? How many people didn't read The Defense?
Well, how to put this? I guess I'm of the school of thought that William Gass embodied when he said that a great book judges its reader, that a reader doesn't judge a book, and that the absence of an audience is not a tragedy to bookdom, it's a tragedy to humanity.
It sounds rather pompous of me, but I say I have no sweat about the fact that these books are inaccessible, my books are inaccessible. I kind of find it really kind of Schadenfreude-like delight in feeling that if people can't get them, that's a condemnation. It's a narcissistic dilemma. As I was telling you the other day, shame on people that have allowed a world where these things can't be had.
Well, I think, this is a gallery of shame or even a museum of shame. I think that a world, for instance, in which a book like Harold Brodke's Runaway Soul gets published and not rhapsodically celebrated for its strangeness, its violence to language, its beauty, its boldness, but rather suddenly, even in the best places, as they say, he has fingers pointed out, pointing at him, and reviewers are saying, "Fool, fool." And you sit there thinking, what has happened? Once there was some, audience that would pick up Darkenville's cat and say, oh, well, we have to create, a special room in the Museum of Culture for the preservation of this, even if only as an artifact.
But I've always been amazed that over the years, my favorite novels have never been bought. Favorite rock and roll songs that I've loved have never been made the top 10 or even the top 100.
Which ones? You see, one of the things that I want to stress, we're going to name them. One of the things I want to stress is that Alexander has been suggesting that his books are unreadable. I would say that he is underselling himself. His books are very funny, and you are as likely to find the names of his 100 favorite rock and roll songs in them as you are to find the outre.
I was going to say Ron Holden, True Love Can Be, a 45 from about 1963. A great rock and roll song. Never saw any sunshine. And the Shortcuts. I don't know. There were a lot of great groups, but I really do think there's a strange. Baron Corvo, and never mind Harold Brodke. Who knows Baron Corvo? Frederick Rolfe. We do, but Hadrian VII, even as a play, lasted about a week on Broadway, and I thought it was a wonderful play. But the novel's a masterpiece.
I was always thought of as being so odd in my literary taste, even among educated people, that, the books that I loved the most were not even taught You know what I mean? It was as if you couldn't even interest students in them.
Right.
And yet they were, to my mind, and have proven to be, enduring, beautiful, strange, funny, wild, perverse, subversive, all of the things that we live for.
You know, I agree with Camille Paglia, who points out that a lot of feminists are very destructive because they're not educated, that you should be educated to things, not just to throw out Socrates because he was a man, but there are a lot of valuable things to know about him. I mean, it's shocking, I think, that people aren't educating themselves to the
Well, I think that is the crux of the matter, educating oneself. Because I have the feeling, you see, I mean, we've all known for a long time that what people learn at American colleges will not help them in the world. But I would like to add that at American colleges, you are not learning the truly valuable things. I always end up thinking of high school students who tell me that they don't like the books. My feeling is that they're reading the wrong ones. They're being given the wrong ones. They're being given the wrong Dickens because it's short and you can teach it. They go to college. They may never read the Arabian Nights or, so many very great things. I'm not talking about
I understand what you're saying.
Out of the way things.
We had to read, in the 7th grade, we had to read Ivanhoe. I mean, a dialect novel, a complicated novel, a not interesting novel, in my opinion. But I think that's the product of, we get bullies for policemen and mal-educated people usually teaching in high school. That's my experience.
I think in colleges as well. I think, you see, in fact, what we have are gifted practitioners of literary theory. Now, as far as I'm concerned, being a gifted practitioner of literary theory is a very nice thing, but it's not a very important one. To recognize a beautiful book, to know it by heart, and to have the enthusiasm that makes everyone in the room have to read it, not just want to read it, but not be able to live.
But graduate
without
schools, for the
reading it.
most part, are just basically interested in students reading secondary material. Isn't that true?
Well, it's become undergraduate as well. I know so many people, and I met some of them out here, who amazed me, who've never read Plato, but who have read Lacan. There's a strange hunger now, not for the new avant-garde novel, but for the new avant-garde commentator. And that's a very odd, so that it's happened that even intellectuals, I think, are not discovering the best in literature. They're discovering the best in theory.
I remember once a day in graduate school when I went up to the head of my department and said, I just finished reading Zuleika Dobson, which I loved. And he said, "How's your dissertation coming?"
I'm talking to Alexander Theroux, and what I want to talk to him about is his center novel, Darkenville's Cat, because this is a book that I would like to see back in the hands of a bookseller, if not of a public, so that a public can take it or leave it. I don't like the idea. I know that you have a perverse gratification that these dainties, which would not be appreciated, can't be had. But I have a different notion. Now, Darkenville's Cat is a novel whose final third introduces what would have been one of the great American comic characters in a novel, would have been there as horrific as Burroughs's Dr. Benway, as weirdly compressed in his astringencies as Humbert Humbert, Dr. Crucifer, who is for all time literature's contemporary misogynist. He takes misogyny so far that it becomes a joke of itself. I think, and you are going to say I'm wrong, that even and perhaps especially feminists would find him uproarious.
No, you're not wrong, but do feminists find anything uproarious?
Well, we're in disagreement.
You know that joke,
there.
by the way? How many?
No.
A man went up to a feminist and
you're
said,
going to lose.
No, I just want to tell one joke. A man went up to a feminist and said, "How many feminists does it take to change a light bulb?" And the feminist reply was, "That's not funny."
Well, I think, in fact, that, they used to say this too, about lesbians, that they weren't funny. But recently I read Jane DeLynne's novel Don Juan in the Village, and it's uproariously funny. I think, that we will always attract our enemies by our vituperation.
No, that's true. And actually, Dr. Crucifer, I was thinking you were going to also name Dr. Matthew Mighty Grain of Salt O'Connor and Knightwood.
Yes, I was.
Because Dr. Crucifer actually is a humorous creation. And Joyce was always very depressed, if I may make this analogy between me and Joyce for a moment. He was always depressed that people found Ulysses less than a funny novel, because he wanted people to laugh. And Darkenville's Cat, my younger brother Peter once said to me, he thought it was one of the funniest novels he's ever read. So it's the humor of going along with you in those lines. He is supposed to be a character with a great deal of comic, value.
It's a novel of disappointed love, in which Darkenville, having fallen in love with one of his students truly head over heels, eventually needs to have her exorcised from his life, and living in what seems like a palatial garret in a house at Harvard, Dr. Crucifer appears. He seems like a wild id character. And what are you saying to me?
No, I'm saying we can make a movie of this.
We can make a movie of this. Do you really think so? Perhaps. He appears to wash that girl right out of his hair. Seems to be the goal. And his exhortations, his litanies, his execrations become. He's a one-man exorcist committee. And his depredations grow more and more hilarious as they become more and more devastating. But it is the climax of a novel, really a philosophical novel, about love and projection.
All love and hate. And Dr. Crucifer becomes, as I say, the objective correlative of Darkenville's hatred. And when I was writing the book, I saw a great deal of potential for different narrative techniques. There's an unholy litany in which Dr. Crucifer walking around a room, I believe the D.S. area is playing at the same time, drama in Cambridge, Massachusetts, recites the names of many horrific women down through the years. So Darkenville actually almost projects Dr. Crucifer as a being, but this is the heavy, dark side of the novel, because it's a novel about love and hate. And I like to think I give both emotions my full attention, though people seem to remember the hate side of it. You know that old conundrum, sinners commit, saints omit. Movie stars invariably want to play negative parts. So we remember the negative parts of this book. I mean, the misogyny is a well-remembered part of the book by readers, but there are a lot of tender moments. Do you disagree?
No, I agree completely. It was an interesting thing, because when you said that movie stars inevitably want to play negative parts, in my experience that's true, and movie producers inevitably want them to play heroes. Mm-hmm. So that there is this tension. That I think that what happens in America is that the creative people know that the devil has all the lines, but the people who know what brings in bucks at the box office know at the same time that role models.
But it's interesting that goodness doesn't do things; it responds. I mean, I think of Milton's Mask, Comus. I mean, Comus is the great part. The woman who's the heroine is as dull as dishwater, and I think it's the active evil is so active and wonderful. I guess that's why people like the parody in reading the Divine Comedy. Remember the Inferno so well. Dorothy Sayers, in her introduction to the paperback edition, by the way, counsels people against all the horrible things. I mean, I could almost echo the same thing, because people come up to me and constantly remember horrible, dark aspects of the latter part of Darkenville's Cat. And I always say, did you read the essay on love? And invariably say, I don't remember it much.
Well, it's twinned by an essay on hate. As I was pointing this out, that the book is so completely balanced a debate or a philosophical inquiry, that I found myself saying that of the many authors I've had on the show, nearly 200, Alexander Theroux is the only one who has 2 X's in his name. And I think that these X's are a balance, and they are Xing one another out, that it's the shape of this book. An essay on love is balanced by an essay on hate. An idealist is balanced by a pragmatist. A bad and woefully undermanaged girls' school is balanced by the high-flown hilarity of Harvard. Everything in this book comes in twins, and in a certain way, dare I admit it, Darkenville dies at the end, and I believe that in the course of things what's happened is he's been canceled out.
But you see, he dies in the book that he writes a novel. And this may sound a little overly symmetrical to your listeners, but I think I pull it off, if I may say so, without seeming gasconading about it. But he dies, but the book lives, in fact, and that's the whole point, that there's a whole, I mean, I'm very much interested in the binaries. There are about maybe 20 major binaries in this novel, but the main one is really the life-art binary, the idea that, I mean, I got a lot of this from Keats and Yeats, that irreconcilable tension of, the permanence of art is the passing of life, but they feed each other and they're mirror images of each other.
Well, it seems to me that what we learn here is that unbearable life can become transcendent art.
And a sentence in the novel is that art is the place where Adam and Eve eat the serpent, because no matter how much pain there is in the novel, Darkenville surfaces with having come to terms with the betrayal of the woman, to write the book about it. And it's much more that I take great personal delight in the fact that Darkenville's cat will be springtime young in the year 2048, say, and the protagonist, or I should say the prototypes in the novel will have long been dead. I mean, Carlos Baker's biography, Hemingway, in a paradoxical way, will always be much younger than Hemingway himself.
You know, it's a very interesting thing that you say that, because I don't think that way, in fact. Mm-hmm. I think that Darkenville's cat in the year 2080, or to any time, will always be not springtime young, but much older than its culture, that the great value of these books is that they are crazy repositories of antiquities.
But you're talking about the point. I mean, in other words, Great Expectation is a book that we isolate in the Victorian period. You're talking a lot about that?
No, I'm saying that as opposed to being as up to the moment as the culture, I think the interesting thing about a book like Darkenville's Cat is that it's really of no period. It may be written about.
But that's my point. My point is that art is long, life is short. That isn't that the point of?
We're in agreement.
Yeah. That art is long. See, the point is, I unlike your listeners, I mean, I remember every painful emotion that informed this book that have been rendered moot, thankfully, because of the therapy, perhaps, of writing. But the fact that it's contected, CONTECTED, together into the pages of the hard covers of that book, because there was a great deal of flux and fluidity and emotional horror in what I brought forward to write that book. You know, I don't want to talk about the novelist as therapist, but I come to my books with passion, and one of the reasons I've only written 3. I'm a middle-aged man, but I come to my books with passion and informed by emotions, and I don't play every tournament like my brother Paul and John Updike.
Well, it seems to me that, how to put this, you were in love when you wrote Darkenville, and I guess one of the odd things is that it is perhaps this century's most tortured novel of love. I think I can't think of a rival. And considering that it is a novel of passion, a Wuthering Heights-like novel, it's written in a century where most love books are bestsellers. Most intellectuals don't find themselves willing to reveal the contortions of the innards.
I used to always tell my students at Harvard and Yale, if you think a love story is a good a novel of love, try War and Peace. I mean, you know, War and Peace I think is one of the greatest love stories ever written, but the title's a bit forbidding perhaps, but people don't know that. I mean, and is this kind of in concert with your point?
Exactly,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's a very good love story in plain soap opera-like point of fact in the book, although it doesn't end happily.
Now, this book is famous even among very refined readers, for it's not hundreds, as in Norman Rush's Mating, but thousands of unknown and previously unseen words. Now, when I read Three Wogs, I was a man with a lot of time, and Three Wogs is a book that's around the seventh length of Darkenville's Cat, so I think I searched out every word in Three Wogs. Darkenville's Cat, I found myself enjoying the process of not knowing exactly the words, that they provided a kind of music and a kind of magic carpet. I could always make out the sense of a sentence, even if I didn't know its particulars, but I do want to know, where do you get those words?
I always say that words are to a writer what paint is to a painter, and it's interesting how people see polysyllabic words or strange words as obfuscatory. I'm kind of using a big word there. But no, people think that large words obfuscate rather than clarify. I find that a great paradox. It's the common words, like coins too long in circulation, that don't clarify discussions or argument.
But Alexander, I want to interrupt you, because while that may have been true in Three Wogs, the multisyllabics, one of the things I love about Darkenville's Cat is that there are so many arcane monosyllables.
That's true. I actually made up quite a few words and out of the Greek and the Latin. But I love words. I think it's very important. And so I'm just one of the few people left in life maybe that don't say groovy and use verbs.
No one says groovy.
Prepositions is noun.
People are starting to say cool again.
I'm really into Venice Beach. I like to think words are just, you know, wonderful props in books, and I mean, I'm a big believer anyway that they clarify.
Alex, I want to thank you for being with me today.
Thanks, Michael. I enjoyed it. I enjoy your company.
I had a good time. I was afraid of you at first.
And I hate to quote John Sununu when he said, "I'm just a pussycat," because he's so much more horrible than that, so I won't even say that.
Well, less horrible, you.
Thanks, Michael.
My associate producer is Melinda Siegel. The engineer is Bob Carlson. I'm Michael Silverblatt. Join me again next week on Bookworm.
To the jungles you can go in books. To the land of ice and snow in books.
Since the taping of this show, one new book by Alexander Theroux has been published. It's a book of his poetry, titled The Lollipop Trollops, and published by the Dalkey Archive Press.
Books can be funny too.
Books make you laugh and sing. Books tell you everything. They're your treasured friends in prose and rhyme.
Now it's Book of the Mouse.